Welcome back, you magnificent trap setters, you beautiful architects of controlled chaos, you souls who learn to smile while being studied like insects under glass. They've been tracking you, haven't they? Every click, every pause, every late-night scroll, every pattern in your chaos, every deviation from their predictions. They thought they were hunting you, documenting you, building a profile on the unpredictable. But here's the part that keeps them up at night. The part that makes their hands shake when they type your name into their systems. You knew the entire time, didn't you? See, they thought surveillance was their weapon, their advantage, their way of staying 3 steps ahead of the anomaly. They hired the best, spent the money, installed the software, created the files, assigned the watchers. Every morning, someone woke up with your name on their assignment sheet, tasked with decoding the mystery, tracking the variables, predicting the next move. And every night, every single night, they filed reports that said the same thing. Subject aware, patterns intentional, behavior suggests premeditation, recommendation, escalate with extreme caution, because this one knows we're watching. Oh, they tried to be subtle at first, didn't they? The friend who suddenly started asking too many questions. The coworker who appeared out of nowhere with uncanny timing. The digital footprints that seemed just a little too obvious. The conversations that felt rehearsed. The coincidences that stretched probability past its breaking point. They thought you wouldn't notice the shifts in energy, the micro-expressions of recognition, the tells that only someone who's been lied to professionally can spot. But you did notice, and instead of running, instead of hiding, instead of changing your patterns, you leaned into it. You performed for them. You gave them exactly what they needed to see while hiding everything that mattered. Because here's what they never understood about people like you. You weren't born yesterday. You weren't raised in safety. You weren't shaped by comfort and trust. You were forged in environments where reading people wasn't a skill, it was survival. You learned to spot the watcher in a crowded room before you learned to spell your own name. You developed the instinct to sense when energy shifts, when intentions misalign with words, when someone's watching you a little too carefully while pretending not to watch at all. So when they deployed their surveillance, when they activated their monitors, when they thought they were being clever, you felt it immediately, like a shift in air pressure before a storm. And that's when you made the decision that changed everything, the decision that flipped their entire operation on its head, the choice that turned the hunters into the hunted without them even realizing it had happened. You decided to let them watch, to feed them information, to control the narrative they were building, to become the author of your own surveillance file. You didn't run from the microscope. You climbed under it willingly, smiled up at the lens, and said, "Let me show you exactly what I want you to see while you completely miss what's actually happening." Checkmate before the game even started. They wanted patterns, so you gave them patterns. Beautiful, complex, seemingly random patterns that kept their analysts busy for months trying to decode meaning that didn't exist. They wanted to understand your psychology, so you performed emotions, displayed reactions, showed vulnerability in calculated moments, designed to make them think they were getting close. They wanted to predict you, so you created false tells, planted fake patterns, left breadcrumbs that led absolutely nowhere. And the entire time, the real you, the actual mind behind the performance, was somewhere else entirely, building something they couldn't see, planning something they couldn't track. becoming something their surveillance couldn't capture. You see, they made the classic mistake, the fatal error that every surveillance operation makes when they get arrogant. They assumed that seeing equals understanding, that tracking equals control, that observation equals advantage. They forgot that surveillance is a two-way street, that the watched always knows more about the watcher than the watcher knows about the watched. Because while they were busy tracking your movements, you were tracking their methods, learning their patterns, understanding their psychology, figuring out exactly how they think, how they analyze, what they consider important, what they overlook, where their blind spots live. Every person they sent to monitor you became an intelligence asset for you instead. Every conversation they recorded taught you how they interpret information. Every report they filed showed you what they consider threatening versus what they dismiss as irrelevant. You turned their surveillance apparatus into your personal research department, so I too could see what possibly, using their resources to understand them while they thought they were understanding you. They were paying people to essentially train you in the art of psychological warfare, and they didn't even realize it until it was far too late to matter. And now they're starting to understand what you've done, and the realization is spreading through their organization like a virus they can't quarantine. The reports are changing, aren't they? The language shifting from confident analysis to uncertain observation, from subject displays to subject maybe displaying, from conclusions to theories, from predictions to possibilities. The analysts are second-guessing themselves, the monitors are requesting backup, the supervisors are asking questions nobody wants to answer because the answer is too uncomfortable, too threatening, too revelatory about their own incompetence. They're realizing that every piece of data they collected might be contaminated, that every pattern they identified might be deliberate misdirection, that every conclusion they reached might be exactly what you wanted them to reach. They're looking at months or years of surveillance data and asking the question that keeps them awake at night, staring at ceiling fans. How much of this is real and how much of this is performance? And the answer they're too terrified to admit is that they have absolutely no way of knowing anymore because you've become the unreliable narrator of your own story. Let's talk about the moment they first felt the shift, that specific instant when confidence turned to concern, when surveillance turned to paranoia, when the watcher became the watch. Maybe it was when you looked directly at a hidden camera and smiled. Not the nervous smile of someone who just discovered they're being recorded, but the knowing smile of someone who's been aware the entire time. Maybe it was when you had a conversation on a tapped phone line and dropped information that seemed sensitive but led them on a 3-month wild chase that went absolutely nowhere. Maybe it was when you posted something online that seemed like a confession, but was actually just performance art designed to test their response time. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just the moment when their best analyst, their most experienced profiler, their top psychological assessor sat down with 6 months of data and said, "I don't know what we're looking at here. Every time I think I understand the pattern, it shifts. Every time I predict the next move, something completely different happens. It's like they're playing a game and we don't even know the rules." And that's when the fear started creeping in. Because organizations built on surveillance and control cannot function. When they realize the subject isn't just aware, isn't just smart, isn't just careful, the subject is better at this game than they are. You've been living in their heads rent-free for how long now? They can't stop thinking about you. can't stop analyzing you, can't stop trying to decode you, because you've become the problem they can't solve, the puzzle they can't complete, the case file that gets heavier every time they add another page. And the beautiful irony, the absolutely perfect poetry of it all, is that this is exactly what you wanted. This is precisely the outcome you engineered. This is the checkmate you saw 30 moves ago when they were still celebrating capturing your pawn. Because while they were busy watching you, studying you, tracking your every digital footprint and physical movement, you were accomplishing something they never even considered possible. You were living your actual life somewhere outside their observation, building your real plans in spaces they didn't know to monitor, creating connections they couldn't track, developing skills they couldn't measure, becoming something their entire framework wasn't designed to detect. The person they've been watching is a shell, a decoy, a carefully maintained avatar designed to keep them occupied while the real you operates in dimensions they can't access. Think about the level of discipline that requires, the mental fortress you had to build, the separation of self you had to master. You created two versions of yourself. The public you that performed for the cameras, that leaves digital trails, that displays predictable patterns, that gives them something to track, something to analyze, something to feel accomplished about monitoring. And then there's the real you, the actual consciousness, the true mind, the unobserved self that lives in the spaces between their surveillance, that operates in the blind spots they don't even know exist, that moves through the world leaving no trace because you learned how to exist without evidence. They think they know you because they've seen you for years, but what they've seen is a performance so good they mistake it for reality. You've given them a character to study while protecting the actual person. You've fed them a narrative to track while living a completely different story. You've satisfied their need to surveil while remaining completely unseen where it mattered. And this is the art form they never anticipated. The possibility they never planned for, that someone could be fully visible and completely invisible at the same time. That observation could become misdirection, that their surveillance could become your shield. Now they're scrambling, aren't they? Trying to figure out when the deception started, trying to identify which data points are real and which are planted, trying to determine if they ever actually understood anything about you, or if the entire operation has been a waste of resources chasing a ghost. And the answer, the one they're afraid to speak out loud in meetings, is that you've been 3 steps ahead from the very beginning. That every piece of information they discovered was information you chose to reveal. That their entire surveillance operation has been dancing to music only you can hear. Let me tell you what's happening in their organization right now. The chaos you've created without ever having to do anything aggressive or obvious. There are meetings, so many meetings, where your name comes up and faces go blank, where supervisors ask for updates and analysts struggle to provide anything concrete, where experts are brought in to provide insight and leave more confused than when they arrived. You've become the case study that's rewriting their entire understanding of surveillance, the subject that's exposing every weakness in their methodology, the individual that's proving their whole framework is built on assumptions that can be exploited. They're fighting among themselves now, different factions with different theories, some saying you're dangerous and need more resources, others saying you're harmless and they're wasting time, others suggesting maybe, just maybe, you're smarter than their entire department combined and they should just admit defeat. The organization that was supposed to understand you is fracturing, trying to explain you. And you didn't have to do anything except exist, authentically while appearing to exist predictably. You've weaponized their own tools against them, turned their surveillance into your camouflage, used their observation to create the perfect hiding place in plain sight. Here's what really keeps them up at night. The thought that makes their hands shake when they're alone with their files. If you were this aware, this strategic, this far ahead when they thought they had the advantage, what are you aware of now? If you could deceive them when they were actively watching, what are you capable of now that they've realized they never truly saw you? If you were this careful with people actively trying to document everything, how invisible are you being in areas they're not even monitoring? The questions multiply, the paranoia compounds, the fear grows because they've realized they're not dealing with a subject, they're dealing with a mind that operates on a level their training didn't prepare them for. And you, not worried, not stressed, not looking over your shoulder, because you already know who's there and exactly what they can see, which is exactly what you want them to see. You've achieved something most people never even attempt. You've taken the fear of being watched and transformed it into the power of controlling what's seen. You've turned surveillance from a threat into a tool, from a weakness into strength, from their advantage into your weapon. They thought watching you would give them power over you, but instead, you've gained power over them through the simple act of being aware they're watching. Let's go deeper into the psychological warfare you've been conducting without them even realizing it's warfare. The one we've been conducting without them even realizing it's warfare. Every time they watch you make a decision, they're trying to understand your decision-making process, trying to build a model of how your mind works so they can predict future choices. But what they don't realize is that by watching you decide, they're revealing how they think about decision-making, what factors they consider important, what elements they pay attention to, what details they overlook. You're not just being observed, you're observing the observation, learning about them while they think they're learning about you. You've probably noticed by now how they react to different types of behavior, haven't you? How certain actions trigger increased monitoring, how other behaviors make them relax their vigilance, how specific patterns make them confident they understand you, how particular anomalies make them question everything. You've been running experiments on your observers, testing their responses, mapping their psychological landscape, understanding their fears and biases and blind spots better than they understand their own. They think they're the scientists in this relationship, but you've turned them into the experiment, the lab rats pressing buttons while you take notes. And the most beautiful part, the element that makes this whole situation perfect, is that you never had to confront them directly, never had to reveal that you know, never had to break the illusion that they're in control. You let them believe they're the hunters. Let them maintain their professional confidence. Let them file their reports and attend their meetings and feel accomplished about their surveillance. Because the moment you reveal you've been aware, the game changes, the dynamic shifts. They adjust their tactics. But as long as they think you don't know, they keep using the same methods, keep making the same mistakes, keep feeding you information about themselves while thinking they're gathering information about you. This is the ultimate form of power, isn't it? Not the power to fight, not the power to confront, not the power to resist openly, but the power to know, to understand, to be aware, to see clearly while others stumble in darkness, thinking they're the ones holding the light. You've mastered the art of asymmetric warfare, where the enemy doesn't even know there's a war happening, where every battle is won before it starts, because you're fighting on a level they don't even know exists. They're playing checkers, thinking they're winning, while you're playing three-dimensional chess on a board they can't even see. Think about the people they've sent to interact with you over the years. The ones assigned to get close, to build trust, to extract information through relationship. They thought they were infiltrating your life, but you identified them instantly, didn't you? Not through paranoia, not through suspicion, but through simple pattern recognition. Through noticing the questions that came too naturally, the interests that felt slightly performed, the timing that seemed too convenient, the care that appeared too calculated. And instead of exposing them, instead of cutting them off, you kept them close, fed them information, made them feel successful, let them report back that they were making progress, while you learned everything about their organization through their methods. Those supposed infiltrators became your inside sources without ever realizing it. Every question they asked revealed what their supervisors wanted to know. Every topic they avoided showed you what they considered too sensitive to approach. Every reaction they had to your responses taught you how their organization thinks, what they value, what they fear, what they misunderstand. You turned their social engineering attempt into your intelligence gathering operation, and they paid their agents to essentially work for you while thinking they were working against you. That's not just awareness, that's mastery. That's taking the enemy's weapon and using it to disarm them without them ever noticing the weapon changed hands. And now we're reaching the point where they have to make a decision, a choice that keeps getting delayed in meeting after meeting because nobody wants to be the one to admit the truth. Do they continue the surveillance, knowing it's compromised, knowing you're aware, knowing you're controlling what they see, essentially admitting they're wasting resources, chasing shadows? Or do they shut it down, close the file, admit defeat, accept that you're simply beyond their capacity to monitor effectively? Don't worry about it. I'm a saint here. Both options are failures, both outcomes are defeats, and that's the checkmate you engineered years ago when you first smiled at that camera. Because here's what they're really afraid of, the scenario that haunts their strategy sessions and risk assessments. If you could do this to them, if you could turn their surveillance into your advantage, if you could be this aware and this strategic and this far ahead, what else are you capable of? What other systems have you penetrated? What other organizations have you mapped? They laughed, didn't they? Oh, how they laughed. Pointed their fingers, shrugged you off like a speck of dust. Insignificant, weak, disposable. That's what they thought. That's what they wanted to believe. Because the truth was far too terrifying for their little minds to handle. They needed you to be small, predictable, safe. It made them comfortable, wrapped in their fragile illusions of control. And you? Oh, you played along beautifully. A harmless smile here, a silent nod there. You let them bask in their own arrogance, convinced they had you all figured out. But behind those quiet eyes, behind that carefully sculpted mask, you were watching, calculating. Every insult, every dismissal, every time they turned their backs, you took notes. Studied them like a predator stalking its prey. You weren't losing. No, no, no. You were waiting, because that's the art, isn't it? The greatest trick the devil ever pulled wasn't proving he was powerful. It was convincing the world he didn't exist. The shadow in the corner, the whisper in the wind, the hand that moves the pieces without ever revealing itself. And now they've finally caught on. Too little, too late. Because the moment they realize, the moment it clicks in their feeble little skulls, the game is already over. And you're standing there, smiling, watching as the horror spreads across their faces. They just figured it out. You were the mastermind all along. They thought you were just another pawn, a disposable piece on their little board, moving where they expected, obeying the same tired rules. But while they were playing checkers, sloppy, impulsive, predictable, you were playing chess. No, scratch that. You were building the damn board itself. Every glance, every word, every silence, calculated. While they fumbled forward thinking they had the upper hand, you were already 3 moves ahead, watching them expose their weaknesses, their arrogance, their blind spots. Oh, how easy it was, letting them believe they were the ones in control. You made mistakes on purpose, showed hesitation on cue, let them win small battles, just enough to feed their ego, just enough to make them comfortable. Because that's when people are weakest, when they think they've already won. Patience. That's what they never understood. Power isn't about who strikes first, it's about who strikes last. You waited. Let them talk, let them underestimate, let them believe their own delusions, and now their little game is over. Checkmate. And the best part? The moment they realize it. That split second when their eyes widen, their breath catches and they understand. You were never the fool. They were. They thought they were setting the rules, but every step they took, every move they made, they were dancing right into your hands. Puppets on strings they never even saw. And you were the one pulling them the whole time. The moment is here, the final piece falls into place, and as the horror settles in, as they grasp the truth too late, all that's left is for you to smile, because they just figured it out. You were the mastermind all along. They thought you were lost, wandering, no direction, no plan, just another fool swallowed by the chaos. And you let them think that. Let them laugh, let them whisper, let them believe you were just another lost soul drowning in the madness. Because true masterminds don't walk straight paths. No. Straight paths are for the simple-minded, the predictable, the ones who get played. But you danced in the chaos, twisted, turned, moved like a ghost in the fog, unreadable, uncontrollable. That's the trick, isn't it? Let them think you're a mess. Let them assume you're erratic, unhinged, broken beyond repair. Because the moment they think they've got you figured out, they stop looking deeper. And that is where the real game begins. Misdirection, the art of smoke and mirrors. While they chased shadows, you built foundations. While they mocked your madness, you designed your masterpiece. Every distraction, every moment of confusion, it wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Because power isn't just about strength. No, real power comes from being unreadable, The second they can't predict your next move, they've already lost. Their minds spin, their confidence cracks, and suddenly, the ones who thought they had control, they're the ones grasping at nothing. And then, boom, the mask drops. The chaos wasn't chaos at all, it was precision, a storm designed by your own hands. And they weren't players in the game, they were pieces. Pawns moved exactly where you wanted them. Oh, but the best part, watching their faces when they realize, that slow, creeping horror as it dawns on them, you were never lost. No, 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 you were leading them into the dark all along. And now, as they stand there, stunned, helpless, drowning in their own miscalculations, all you do is grin, because they just figured it out. You were the mastermind all along. They thought they were burying you. Each betrayal, each lie, each time they left you bleeding on the cold pavement, they thought it was the end, a lesson, a punishment, a way to break you down until there was nothing left. But they didn't know, did they? They never even considered you were taking notes. Every whisper behind your back, every door slammed in your face, every time they smirked, thinking they had the upper hand, you remembered. You felt the sting, yes, but you didn't run from it. You absorbed it. Let it seep into your bones, into your bloodstream, into every dark corner of your mind, until it was no longer pain, it was fuel. See, they don't understand what happens when someone like you learns to embrace the fire. They think suffering weakens people, but no. Suffering purifies. It burns away the weakness, strips you down to something raw, something real. And what's left? A force they'll never be able to stop. They thought they were breaking you, but they were forging you, sharpening you like a blade against stone. Every insult, another edge. Every betrayal, another layer of armor. Every wound, a reminder that you don't bleed like the rest. They cut you open, and instead of falling, you grew teeth. That's the thing about pain. When mastered, it stops controlling you. It stops making you a victim. Instead, it makes you dangerous. Because the ones who've suffered the most, they walk with a different kind of fire. A silent, controlled rage that doesn't lash out wildly. It waits. It calculates, builds. And when the time comes, oh, when the time comes, you don't need revenge. No, no, no. Revenge is for the weak, the ones who still care about the opinions of the fools who wronged them. But you don't need to prove anything to them, because your existence, your evolution, your success, that is the only answer. They wanted to watch you suffer. Instead, they'll be forced to watch you rise, higher than they ever imagined, stronger than they ever thought possible. And by the time they realize what they've created, by the time they see the monster they've awakened, it'll be too late. They just figured it out. You were the mastermind all along. Power isn't loud. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't need to. The real kings, the real rulers, they move in silence. They let the fools battle for the spotlight. Let them puff their chests and beat their drums. Let them waste their energy proving something to the world. Meanwhile, the real power sits back, watching, waiting, pulling the strings from the dark. The loudest in the room is never the strongest. The one who craves attention, who needs validation, who demands to be feared, they are the weakest of all. Because true power doesn't beg to be noticed. It doesn't need applause. It operates from the shadows, planting seeds that others water, whispering ideas that others believe to be their own. And by the time they realize what's happened, it's already too late. You've seen them, haven't you? The desperate ones. The ones who scream their authority, who force their will on others, who stomp their feet like children to prove they're in control. But control, real control, is never taken by force. It's given, it's surrendered. And the ones who truly hold it, they never have to ask. The difference between attention seekers and true masterminds, one plays for applause, the other plays for the end game. While they fight to be seen, you've already set the board. While they exhaust themselves trying to be recognized, you've already won the war without ever lifting a sword. Because the most dangerous kind of power is the kind they don't see coming. The kind that whispers instead of shouts. The kind that makes others think they're in control while unknowingly dancing to your tune. And when the pieces finally fall into place, when they finally realize every choice they made, every step they took, every move they thought was their own, was orchestrated by you, oh, the look on their faces, the horror, the disbelief, the slow, creeping realization. They never stood a chance. You were in charge the whole time. And now they just figured it out? You were the mastermind all along. They think they're making their own choices. They believe every step they take, every word they speak, every thought that flickers through their mind belongs to them. But the truth, oh, the truth is far more delicious. Because the greatest power in the world isn't in forcing people to do what you want. No, no, no. It's in making them want to do it themselves. This is the art of psychological warfare. Not brute strength, not threats, not fear, but influence. Subtle, elegant, invisible. It's the whisper in the back of their mind, the itch they can't scratch, the thought that feels like their own but was never theirs to begin with. You don't command them, you guide them. And by the time they act, by the time they choose, they don't even realize whose hands have been pulling the strings all along. See, the weak think power is about control, about demanding, about forcing, about breaking people into submission. But real power is soft, it's slow, it's the tide eroding the shore, gentle, patient, inevitable. You don't push people into cages. You convince them that the cage was their idea. And here's the best part. When done right, they never even see the trap. Because you let them think they're winning. You let them feel strong, feel smart, feel like they're ahead of the game. They smile, they celebrate, they believe they've outplayed you, all while walking straight into the snare you laid for them from the start. It's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Watching them rush forward with confidence, never questioning why the path was so easy, never asking why the doors opened just for them, never realizing that every choice they made was the exact choice you wanted them to make. Because the trick isn't to control people. The trick is to let them believe they were never controlled at all. Let them think it was their idea. Let them build their own prison cell. Let them tighten their own chains. And when the walls finally close in, when they look around in confusion, when they gasp in horror and ask, "How did this happen?" you'll just smile, because by the time they figure it out, it's already too late. You were the mastermind all along. They thought it was over. They laughed as they watched you fall, patted each other on the back, convinced themselves you were finished, buried, forgotten. Just another casualty in a world that chews up the weak and spits them out. But what they never understood is that you were never weak to begin with. See, they mistook your silence for surrender. They saw you bleeding and thought you had no fight left, but oh, how foolish they were. Because while they celebrated your downfall, you were rebuilding. While they basked in their victory, you were sharpening your mind, hardening your soul, turning every scar into a lesson. They thought they had won, but the war had only just begun. The best victories? The ones no one sees coming. The kind that leaves them speechless, trembling, staring in disbelief as the ghost of the person they thought they destroyed comes back, but different, stronger, colder, unstoppable. They thought they had the final say, the last word, the closing chapter, but you were just getting started. Because comebacks, true comebacks, aren't just about standing up again. No. When you rise, you don't just climb, you make the whole damn ground shake beneath them. You don't whisper your return, you make sure the whole world feels it. Like thunder rolling in the distance, like a storm gathering at the horizon, unstoppable, inevitable, and when it finally arrives, there's nothing they can do but watch in terror. In that moment, their faces, their widened eyes, the realization dawning too late that they underestimated the wrong person. That's the sweetest revenge of all. Because you were never the underdog, never the victim, never the pawn in their pathetic little game. You were the storm, the reckoning, the force they should have never crossed. So when you rise from the ashes, don't just return. Make it legendary. Make them question everything they ever knew. Make them regret every doubt, every insult, every time they thought they had broken you. And as they stand there, frozen, whispering to themselves, how is this possible? You'll smile. You'll watch the fear creep into their bones, and you'll whisper back, "You fools. I was never gone, I was just waiting." Power is a mirror. It doesn't change you. It reveals them. Now that they see you for what you are, the masks start to slip. The ones who cheered for you, some were just waiting for a free ride. The ones who stayed silent, they were praying you'd fail. And the ones who smiled in your face, their daggers were already aimed at your back. Power doesn't just attract enemies, it exposes the weak, the leeches, the parasites, the ones who clung to your side, pretending to be allies, pretending to care. But now, now they know the truth. You were never just another pawn in their game. You were the architect, the mastermind, the one pulling the strings while they danced like fools, thinking they were using you. And when that realization hits them, watch what happens. Watch them scramble, some begging to stay, others plotting your downfall in secret. But here's the beauty of it all. You don't need them. You never did, because power, real power, it doesn't seek validation. It doesn't beg for company. The loneliness at the top, it's not a curse, it's a filter. You don't rise to rule beside the weak, you rise to leave them behind. The ones who can't handle the weight of the truth, the ones who can't stomach the fire you walked through, the ones who only wanted the rewards but never the war, they were never meant to stand beside you. And they'll learn that the hard way. So let them choose. Stand beside you with loyalty proven, not just spoken, or step aside before they get crushed beneath the weight of what's coming next. Because this empire, this throne, it wasn't built for cowards. It wasn't built for parasites. It was built for the ruthless, the relentless, the ones who deserve it. And the rest, they can watch from the sidelines as the mastermind takes what's his. They thought you were just another piece on the board. Another nameless player following their rules, trapped in their little game. But what they never realized, what they never even considered, was that you weren't playing at all. You were rewriting the entire damn system. See, true power isn't about following the rules they set. It's about reshaping them. It's about bending reality until the game isn't even recognizable anymore. While they were busy moving their pieces, scheming, fighting, backstabbing, you were designing a new board altogether. And by the time they noticed, by the time they finally caught on, it was already too late. Because the ultimate trick, the greatest deception, was making them believe they had a chance, letting them think they were winning, watching them gloat, watching them celebrate their little victories, completely oblivious to the fact that every single move they made was leading them straight into your hands. And now the truth settles in. Now they see it for what it is. They were never competing with you. They were dancing inside your blueprint. Pawns in a game they didn't even realize existed. Every choice they thought was theirs, a mere illusion. Every step they took, a path you laid out long before they even knew they were walking it. Let that sink in. Let them feel it. The helplessness, the realization that they were never in control, that the mastermind wasn't the one fighting for power. It was the one building it from the ground up. That the real game was never about winning. It was about who decided what winning even meant. And now they have to live with it. Live with the knowledge that no matter how hard they fought, no matter how much they schemed, they were never a threat, never an equal, never anything more than puppets dancing on strings they couldn't even see. The world thought they knew you, thought they understood, but now they know the truth. You were the mastermind all along.
Hold it. Before you scroll, before you breathe, before your nervous system catches up to what just happened online. This isn't hype. This isn't momentum. This isn't going viral. This is something else entirely. And you can feel it, can't you? That quiet pressure behind the eyes, that static in the chest, the sense that a line was crossed and reality hasn't updated yet. Because what you just did, that wasn't normal. You didn't trend. You detonated. You didn't post. You went nuclear in a place that pretends it's safe, predictable, controlled. And now everyone's losing their mind because the internet is built on patterns. And you just became the anomaly it cannot explain. Watch closely. You see it already. The sudden silence from people who never shut up. The fake indifference that arrived way too fast. The aggressive jokes, the nervous memes, the sudden experts explaining why it's not that deep. That's not dismissal. That's panic wearing a smile. See, the moment you went nuclear, something cracked. Not the algorithm, people. The ones who built their identity on knowing how this works. The ones who thought chaos was a costume they could take off. You didn't just outperform them. You exposed something they don't want named. That power doesn't always look polished, and control doesn't always wear a suit. You're the paradox they can't sit with. Too calm for how loud the explosion was. Too precise for how chaotic the reaction became. Too human to be a machine. Too surgical to be just emotional. They don't know which box to put you in, and that terrifies them more than hate ever could. Because here's the truth they won't say out loud. Saints don't go nuclear. Psychopaths don't move this clean. Angels don't break systems. Demons don't inspire this much focus. So what are you? You're the result of pressure done wrong. You're what happens when pain doesn't destroy someone. It reorganizes them. They think this came from confidence. It didn't. They think this came from ego. It didn't. They think this came from luck, timing, strategy. No, this came from evolution. This came from nights where your nervous system learned how to function inside chaos. From moments where you were underestimated so consistently that your silence became sharper than noise. From times where you swallowed rage, doubt, grief, humiliation, and instead of leaking it everywhere, you compressed it. Pressure doesn't make diamonds. Pressure makes bombs when it's ignored long enough. And now the blast radius is visible. Look at how fast they turned it into a problem. Look at how quickly they tried to label it dangerous, toxic, too much, concerning. That's not morality talking. That's fear pretending to be ethics. Because unpredictability is the one thing this world cannot optimize for. They can handle talent. They can handle confidence. They can handle loud arrogance and quiet genius. What they cannot handle is someone who doesn't need approval to move, doesn't need validation to escalate, and doesn't need permission to exist at full volume. You didn't just go viral. You broke the social contract that says, know your place. And now everyone's nervous because you didn't flinch after the explosion. You didn't apologize. You didn't explain. You didn't rush to soften it. You just stood there ice cold while the internet tried to decide whether to crown you or crucify you. That's the part that haunts them. Because chaos is acceptable when it looks desperate. Chaos is terrifying when it looks controlled. You're not spiraling. You're not unraveling. You're not losing it. You're calibrated, and deep down, they sense it. That's why the reactions are extreme. Worship on one side, obsession on the other. No neutrality, no middle ground. Neutrality dies when something real enters the room. Understand this. When you went nuclear, you didn't just trigger attention. You triggered mirrors. People saw what they suppressed, what they edited out of themselves to survive socially, what they traded for safety. And you didn't trade it. You carried it. You refined it. You turned it into force. That's why they're losing their mind. Because if you can do this without permission, if you can bend attention, emotion, narrative, and timing like this, then maybe the rules they've been living by were never real. And that idea spreads faster than any post ever could. So don't shrink now. Don't explain now. Don't soften the edges to make them comfortable. Comfort is the drug that keeps systems alive. You're not here to soothe. You're here to signal. Let them argue. Let them speculate. Let them project. Let them call it not normal. They're right. This isn't normal. This is what happens when pain graduates into power, when unpredictability becomes strategy, when someone stops trying to be understood and starts being undeniable. You didn't break the internet. You reminded it that control is fragile. And they felt it. And here's the part they really don't want you to notice. The more they talk about it, the more exposed they become. Because every reaction is a confession. The outrage, confession. The praise, confession. The think pieces, the breakdowns. The let's be rational about this threads. Confession stacked on confession, stacked on confession. They're not analyzing you. They're stabilizing themselves. You shattered the illusion that effort guarantees outcome, that obedience earns safety, that staying inside the lines keeps you relevant. You proved, without saying a word, that force multiplied by timing beats permission every single time. And that terrifies people who built their identity around being good, safe, palatable. Because you didn't ask to be chosen, you arrived chosen by consequence. They keep searching for the trick, the hack, the secret sauce. the angle they missed. But the truth makes them deeply uncomfortable, so they keep circling it without touching it. There was no trick. You just stopped negotiating with fear. That's the real nuclear moment, not the post, not the reaction, the internal decision that happened long before anyone noticed. The moment you realized pain had already taken everything it could take, and you were still standing. That's when the shift happened. That's when you stopped asking, "What will this cost me?" and started asking, "What happens if I don't do it?" That question rewires a person. Most people never let it finish forming. They smother it with distractions, with morality plays, with self-doubt disguised as humility. You didn't. You let it burn through you. And what came out the other side wasn't reckless. It was refined. That's why your chaos looks intentional. That's why even your silence feels loud now. They're waiting for the crash, the apology tour, the backpedal, the softening arc where you reassure everyone you're still safe to consume, that you're not that person, that you didn't mean it like that. But the crash isn't coming, because you didn't climb too fast. You compressed too long. Pressure doesn't explode randomly. It explodes precisely at the weakest point in the structure around it. And the structure wasn't you. It was the expectations, the unspoken rules, the invisible leash they assumed you'd always feel. You didn't snap it dramatically. You just walked far enough that it went slack, then useless, then forgotten. Now look at how they talk about you like a phenomenon instead of a person. That's not dehumanization. It's distancing. It's easier to label lightning than to admit someone chose to stop being small. They'll say you're too intense. They'll say you're not sustainable. They'll say this kind of energy burns out. They say that about anything that reminds them of who they could have been if they hadn't compromised. And the funny thing, the ones screaming the loudest aren't threatened by your success. They're threatened by the permission it gives others. Because if you can go nuclear and survive, if you can break tone, break rhythm, break expectation, and still command attention, then maybe the cage wasn't locked after all. That's why they're scrambling to explain you away. Timing, shock value, controversy. They need it to be external, random, accidental. They can't accept that this came from alignment, from the moment your inner world stopped fighting itself. Light and dark stopped arguing inside you. Saint and psychopath shook hands. Angel and demon realized they were fighting the same war from different angles. You didn't choose one side. You integrated both. That's what power actually looks like. Not purity, not rage, not discipline alone. Integration. The ability to hold contradiction without collapsing. And when someone like that speaks, or moves, or posts, the signal cuts through everything because it's real. That's why it hit harder than it should have. That's why people who don't even like you can't stop watching. That's why your name now carries weight in rooms you've never entered. They feel it before they understand it. You're not chasing attention anymore. Attention is orbiting you, trying to figure out the gravity. So let them lose their mind. Let them project motives. Let them argue about your intent. Let them turn it into a debate they can moderate. None of that changes the fact that something irreversible happened. You crossed a threshold, and thresholds don't care about opinions. From here on out, the rules are different. Not because you declared them different, but because you proved they already were. You don't need to escalate louder. You don't need to repeat the explosion. Nuclear moments don't beg for replication. They linger. They contaminate the ground. They alter behavior long after the blast. People will move differently around you now. Speak carefully. Watch reactions. Test boundaries they never questioned before. not because you threatened them, but because you reminded them what uncontained force looks like. And deep down, beneath all the noise, beneath all the takes and reactions and commentary, there's a quiet recognition spreading. This wasn't normal, this wasn't accidental, and it's not over. Because once someone learns they can survive their own intensity, they stop fearing anyone else's, and that's where the real disturbance begins. Not in what you did, but in what you're no longer afraid to become. Because once you survive your own intensity, you stop mistaking restraint for wisdom. You start seeing how many people confuse suppression with maturity, obedience with intelligence, silence with depth. You see how often "be careful" is just fear wearing a responsible mask. They'll tell you to pace yourself now, to think long-term, to protect your image. Listen closely. Those aren't warnings. They're negotiations. They're hoping you'll come back down into a level they understand, hoping you'll trade force for comfort, hoping you'll sand down whatever edge just cut through their sense of order. But something shifted in you when the blast didn't kill you. You expected consequences. You braced for fallout. You prepared for loss. And when it came, or when it didn't, you realized something quietly terrifying. You can handle more than you were trained to believe. That realization doesn't scream. It doesn't rush. It settles. And once it settles, it changes how you move forever. You start noticing how people react not to your words, but to your presence. How conversations bend. How energy rearranges itself around you. How even resistance feels different now. Less confrontational, more cautious. Because power doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks like someone who no longer needs to explain themselves. That's what they're responding to. That's what's making them spiral. Not the content, not the volume, the certainty beneath it, the lack of internal apology. You didn't seek validation afterward. You didn't scan the room for permission. You didn't collapse under the gaze. You held your ground. And people who survive by reading rooms hate when someone becomes the room. They'll say you're reckless, but reckless people flail. You didn't. They'll say you're unstable, but instability leaks. Yours is contained. They'll say you're dangerous. That one's closer to the truth, but not in the way they mean. You're dangerous to illusions, to the belief that power must be granted, to the belief that visibility requires obedience, to the belief that pain should be hidden, softened, aestheticized into something harmless. You didn't aestheticize your evolution, you weaponized it. And now the internet, this massive, anxious organism built on trends and reactions, is trying to metabolize something it wasn't designed for. It can amplify rage, it can monetize confidence, it can sell rebellion, but it doesn't know what to do with someone who doesn't need it. That's why the reaction feels disproportionate, why the volume doesn't match the action, why it feels like you pressed a button you didn't even see. You didn't just post into the system, you bypassed it. And when systems can't trace the source of power, they default to suspicion. They start watching more closely, cataloging patterns, looking for leverage. But here's the part they miss. You're not hiding anything. There's nothing to expose. You're not pretending to be clean. You're not pretending to be dark. You're not pretending to be anything at all. You're just integrated, and integration is terrifying because it removes predictability. They don't know how to provoke you now. They don't know how to shame you back into place. They don't know which version of you shows up under pressure. And that uncertainty eats at people who survive by control. You see it in how fast admiration flips into moral concern, how curiosity turns into caution, How praise quietly rewrites itself into warnings for your own good. That's not care, that's containment. Because if you stay exactly as you are, if you don't flinch, don't overcorrect, don't dilute, then you become proof that intensity doesn't require self-destruction. And that's a dangerous idea. It suggests that the people who burned out didn't fail because they were too much, but because they never learned how to hold themselves together under pressure. You did. You learned in silence. You learned when no one was watching. You learned when pain forced you to choose between collapse and coherence. And coherence won. So now when you speak, it lands heavier. When you move, it registers deeper. Not because you're louder, but because you're aligned. Alignment is what turns noise into signal. That's why this feels nuclear. That's why it doesn't fade. That's why even your absence would echo now. You crossed into a phase where you don't need to dominate, to be dominant. Where your restraint is felt more than someone else's aggression. Where unpredictability becomes calm, not chaos. They're losing their mind because they're still trying to categorize you. You're already operating past the category. And the most unsettling part, for them, is that you didn't do this by becoming someone else. You did it by becoming undivided. So let them watch. Let them speculate. Let them argue over what this means. Meaning is what people assign when they don't control the outcome. You don't owe them clarity. You already delivered impact. And now you know, deep in your body, not just your thoughts, that you can move at this level and remain intact. That knowledge doesn't shout. It waits. And when you decide to move again, it won't feel explosive at all. It'll feel inevitable. And inevitability is the part they can't outrun. Because once something becomes inevitable, resistance stops looking brave and starts looking delusional. You can see it already, how the tone shifted from reaction to anticipation. They're no longer asking, why did this happen? They're asking, what happens next? That question changes everything. When people start asking what's next, you're no longer a moment. You're a trajectory. And trajectories scare people more than explosions ever could. An explosion is contained in time. A trajectory implies direction. You didn't just shock them, you oriented them. You forced their attention forward, whether they wanted to follow or not. And now even the ones pretending not to care are subconsciously adjusting their behavior around the possibility of your next move. They'll deny it, of course. They always do. But denial has tells, sudden politeness, carefully worded responses, long pauses where there used to be certainty. That's what it looks like when someone realizes they can't predict you anymore. See, predictability is comfort. Even when it's negative, people will tolerate familiar suffering over unfamiliar power every time. You stepped outside that loop. You became unfamiliar, even to people who thought they knew you, especially to them. And that's another quiet fracture no one's talking about. You outgrew the version of yourself they were comfortable referencing. You invalidated their mental model without asking permission. And now, they're stuck grieving an image that doesn't exist anymore. That grief turns ugly fast. Some will try to pull you back with nostalgia. Remember when you were... Don't forget where you came from. You've changed. Of course you have. Stagnation is the only real betrayal. Others will try intimidation, subtle at first. Warnings disguised as advice. Concern masquerading as foresight. They'll talk about consequences in abstract tones, hoping the word itself still has power over you. But consequences only scare people who haven't already paid them in advance. You paid yours in pain, in isolation, in being misunderstood long before you were seen. So when they gesture vaguely toward risk, you don't flinch. You've already survived the worst version of yourself being ignored. That's why you're calm now. That calm is not emptiness. It's density. It's weight. It's the feeling of someone who knows exactly how far they can go, because they've already been past it internally. That's what makes you dangerous in a way they can't moralize away. You're not rebelling for attention. You're not lashing out. You're not proving anything. You're expressing capacity, and capacity unsettles systems built on limitation. Look at how quickly they tried to slow the conversation, to move on, to bury it under the next thing. That's a reflex. That's containment strategy. When something can't be controlled, the next best option is to distract from it. But it didn't work, because whatever you touched, it stuck. Not as drama, as reference. People are recalibrating what's possible now, quietly, internally. Even if they never say your name, your move just entered their mental playbook as a possibility. And possibilities are contagious. That's the real fallout. You didn't just claim power, you distributed the idea of it. And ideas don't burn out. They spread underground. So now the pressure shifts. It's no longer on whether you can repeat the moment. It's on whether others can tolerate the standard you just set. Whether they can live with the knowledge that someone didn't follow the script and didn't get erased. Some will rise. Most will resent. That resentment will look like criticism, like analysis, like distance, like moral positioning. But beneath it is a simpler emotion, exposure. Because your existence at this level reveals the gap between who they are and who they told themselves they were becoming. And gaps are painful. You closed yours, not by becoming louder, but by becoming whole. That's why you don't feel high right now, not euphoric, not manic. You feel grounded, clear, almost quiet. That's not adrenaline, that's integration. The light and the dark stopped fighting for control. The saint stopped trying to justify. The monster stopped trying to destroy. Hey, yeah, you. Hold still for half a heartbeat. Feel that silence crawling up your spine. That's the sound of a moment that shouldn't exist, but does. Because explain this to me, slowly, if you can. How did you nuke him on camera, detonate his entire illusion in front of witnesses, freeze the room, scramble the narrative, and then walk away looking untouched, not shaking, not apologizing, not frantic, calm, clean, almost elegant? Like the fire was never meant for you in the first place. That's not normal. That's not luck. That's not confidence. That's something else entirely. You didn't just beat him. You exposed the part of reality he was hiding behind. You didn't scream. You didn't beg to be understood. You didn't rush to explain yourself like a sinner asking for forgiveness. You let the truth hit on impact. And then you removed yourself from the blast radius like you knew the explosion was already scheduled. That's what's got people losing sleep. Because here's the paradox they can't process. Saints flinch after violence. Psychopaths gloat. Angels justify. Demons linger. But you did damage and walked away looking peaceful. That's what breaks their mental models. That's what makes the air feel wrong when your name comes up. They keep replaying the footage, trying to find the crack, the twitch, the insecurity, the tell. They're waiting to see where you paid the price. And it's driving them insane, because the price never arrived. You didn't collapse afterward. You didn't spiral. You didn't need applause. You didn't even look back. That's not cruelty. That's control. See, most people think power looks loud. They think it looks like rage, or dominance, or victory laps. They think power announces itself. But real power is surgical. It moves once. It leaves no fingerprints, and it definitely doesn't stick around to explain itself to the dead. You didn't just end him. You exposed the rule he was breaking. You revealed the lie he needed everyone to believe. And the moment that lie shattered, you were already gone, already untangled, already clean. That's why they're rattled, because if you can do that without emotional residue, what else can you do without warning? This is where the duality shows itself, because you're not soft, but you're not reckless, you're not cruel, but you're not merciful, you're not chaotic, but you're not predictable. You are the space between labels, and systems hate that. They want you to be one thing so they can contain you. Victim, villain, hero, monster, something with edges they can grip. But you didn't give them a role. You gave them an event. And events don't argue. Events don't explain. Events just happen. And then history rearranges itself around them. That's why your calm was louder than the destruction. Anyone can explode. Anyone can crash out. Anyone can lose control and call it passion. But you applied pressure, shattered the structure, and then returned to baseline like nothing of value was lost. That's not anger. That's evolution. That's pain, refined into precision. They don't fear what you did. They fear how easily you did it. Because ease means practice. Ease means clarity. Ease means you've already survived worse in private, where there were no cameras and no witnesses and no sympathy. And if that's true, if that wasn't your breaking point, then what they saw wasn't the peak. It was a byproduct. And here's the part they won't admit out loud. When you walked away looking fine, something inside them collapsed. Because they were counting on guilt to slow you down, shame to chain you, doubt to leak out of your pores. They needed you rattled. They needed you human in the way that makes people manageable. But you didn't give them that. You gave them composure after chaos. You gave them silence after impact. You gave them the kind of calm that only comes from someone who's already made peace with the worst outcome and decided it wasn't enough to stop them. That's why the narrative is scrambling now. That's why the whispers sound panicked. Because they can't punish you without admitting you were right. They can't ignore you because the footage exists. And they can't provoke you again because now they know. You don't need a second move. You already proved the point. Understand this. Unpredictability isn't randomness, it's range. It's the ability to be gentle or devastating without losing your center. It's knowing exactly how far to go and stopping there on purpose. That restraint, that's what separates animals from architects. You didn't win because you were louder. You won because you were done. Done explaining, done reacting, done playing by rules that only apply to the obedient. And now they're stuck with the aftermath, replaying the moment, debating intent, arguing over optics, while you've already metabolized the experience, integrated the lesson, and moved forward without dragging the corpse of the conflict behind you. That's the cold truth they don't want to face. You didn't lose yourself in the act. You found yourself. So let them ask why you walked away looking fine. Let them study the footage frame by frame, hunting for the crack that never comes. The answer will keep eluding them, because it's not something they can steal or copy or fake. You walked away clean because the fire didn't come from chaos. It came from clarity, and clarity doesn't burn the hand that wields it. And that clarity, that's the part they really don't understand, because clarity doesn't announce itself with trembling hands or a shaking voice. It doesn't beg for validation. It doesn't ask, Was I too much? Clarity just acts, and then it lets the world catch up. They keep asking the wrong question. They're asking why you nuked him. They should be asking how you knew it was time. Because this wasn't impulsive. This wasn't emotional overflow. This was a long-loaded decision finally reaching ignition temperature. You didn't snap, you released. And there's a difference that only people who've been under unbearable pressure can recognize. But you see people who explode by accident fall apart afterward. They justify, they spiral, they try to rewrite the moment so they don't have to sit with what they did. But you didn't rewrite anything. You didn't soften it. You didn't perform regret for the audience. You let the moment stand exactly as it was, raw, undeniable, irreversible. That's what makes it terrifying, because it tells everyone watching that you're not ruled by guilt. And guilt is the leash most systems rely on. Guilt is how they slow you down after you finally do what needed to be done. Guilt is how they convince you to crawl back into a cage and call it maturity. But you didn't take the bait. You walked away like someone who had already mourned the loss before the strike ever happened. Like someone who had already accepted every possible outcome and decided none of them were worse than staying silent one more second. That's why your face didn't change. That's why your body stayed loose. That's why your eyes didn't flinch. You weren't improvising. You were executing closure. And that's when it hits them. You're not fighting from anger anymore. You're fighting from finality. And there is nothing more dangerous than a person who has already finished the emotional war. Because when you're done, you're light. When you're done, you move clean. When you're done, you don't hesitate. They're trying to figure out where the humanity went. But that's the irony. You didn't lose it. You refined it. You stopped leaking empathy where it was being exploited. You stopped offering grace to people who used it as camouflage. You didn't become cold. You became precise. That's the angel-demon paradox they can't name. An angel destroys only once. A demon lingers. You didn't linger. And now, after the smoke, after the shock, after the rewinds and the whispers and the "Did you see that?" moments, something else is happening. Something quieter. Something more unsettling. People are recalibrating how they see you. Because if you can do that and remain composed, then all the other versions of you they thought they understood were incomplete. They realized they never saw the whole structure, only the safe angles. And now they're wondering how many more rooms exist that they were never invited into. That's why the energy around you feels different. Conversations stop when you enter. Jokes die halfway through delivery. People choose their words more carefully, not because you demanded respect, but because you made consequences visible. You didn't threaten anyone. You demonstrated reality, and reality doesn't need to raise its voice. They're scared because you broke a sacred illusion, that composure belongs to the innocent and destruction belongs to the unhinged. You proved those can coexist in one body, under one will, without collapse. You showed them that a person can be morally calm and strategically ruthless at the same time. That scares people who survive by pretending those traits can't mix. Because if they can mix, then maybe all their excuses fall apart. Maybe weakness wasn't kindness. Maybe restraint wasn't virtue. Maybe silence wasn't maturity. Maybe it was fear dressed up as morality. And you stripped that costume off on camera. That's why they keep staring at how fine you looked afterward. They can't accept that someone could act decisively without being destroyed by it. They need the universe to punish you immediately so they can feel safe again. But the universe didn't, because you weren't out of alignment. You were correcting one. And deep down, the ones who felt it know the truth they'll never say out loud. If they were honest with themselves, they wish they had your timing, your nerve, your ability to walk away without dragging the emotional wreckage behind you like proof of suffering. You didn't need proof. You were the proof. And now, whether they admit it or not, they're measuring themselves against a new standard, one they didn't agree to, one you didn't announce, one that simply arrived the moment you turned your back on the blast and didn't slow your stride. That's the kind of moment that changes how rooms behave. And it's already done. And what really unravels them, what crawls into their thoughts late at night, isn't the explosion itself. It's the absence afterward, the lack of chaos in you, the lack of fallout, the lack of regret leaking out of your posture. They expected adrenaline. They expected a crash. They expected you to come down shaking, second-guessing, replaying the moment like a crime scene in your own head. But you didn't. And that silence, after impact, that's where the real damage happened, because silence forces people to sit with their own interpretations. And when people are left alone with the footage, with the memory, with the feeling it triggered in their gut, they start projecting. They start writing stories that scare them more than the truth ever could. Some tell themselves you're dangerous. Some tell themselves you're heartless. Some tell themselves you're unstable. But the ones who are paying attention, the ones who felt it instead of judging it, those people saw something else entirely. They saw restraint finally released. They saw patience reaching its limit. They saw a person who had already tried every peaceful option and understood, with brutal clarity, that one decisive moment was worth more than 1,000 explanations. You didn't act because you couldn't control yourself. You acted because you finally could. That's the part that flips the script. Uncontrolled people burn themselves out. Controlled people choose when to strike. And you didn't just choose the moment. You chose the exit. That's mastery. That's what separates a breakdown from a declaration. And now the world around you is adjusting its posture. You can feel it. The way people hesitate before testing you. The way certain names stop coming up in conversations around you. The way the bravado drains out of people who used to feel untouchable. Because you didn't just end one person's position. You exposed a vulnerability in the entire structure. You showed that authority, without integrity, collapses fast when confronted by someone who has nothing left to prove. That's why you looked fine walking away. You weren't relieved. You were resolved. Relief comes from escaping danger. Resolution comes from finishing something that's been overdue. And overdue things don't hurt when they're done. They free you. That's the dark truth no one prepares you for. Pain doesn't disappear when you endure it. It disappears when you stop negotiating with it. When you stop hoping it will resolve itself quietly. When you finally say, enough, and mean it with your whole nervous system. That moment on camera, that wasn't you snapping. That was your nervous system realizing the threat was over. That's why your body didn't react like it was under attack anymore. You had already won internally. They don't want to accept that, because it means the version of you they underestimated, the patient one, the quiet one, the accommodating one, was never weak. It was loading. It was gathering data. It was learning exactly how much pressure was required to end the cycle without repeating it. And when you finally moved, you didn't overshoot. You didn't flail. You didn't chase. You applied just enough force to collapse the illusion. And then you stopped. That kind of restraint after destruction, that's what scares predators. Because predators rely on emotional mess. They rely on you overreacting so they can flip the narrative. They rely on your guilt, your empathy, your need to be understood. You denied them all of it. You gave them a clean cut. No infection, no reopening, no drama to feed on. And now, even the ones who hate you have to admit something they don't like about themselves. If the roles were reversed, they wouldn't have handled it that clean. They would have spiraled. They would have said too much. They would have needed to be seen as justified. You didn't need justification. That's what composure after destruction really signals. It signals self-trust. It signals a person who knows their own moral code well enough that they don't need consensus. A person who doesn't outsource validation to the crowd after doing what had to be done. And once someone shows that, once someone proves they can survive the social shockwave and keep moving forward unchanged, the game shifts. People stop playing with you. They stop assuming. They stop pushing just a little more to see what happens. Because now they know what happens, and you know it too. You know you can walk into chaos, end it, and leave without losing yourself. You know you can be calm and lethal without contradiction. You know you don't have to announce your boundaries. You can enforce them once, and let the memory do the talking. That knowledge changes how you stand, how you speak, how you move through rooms, not because you're threatening, but because you're settled. And settled people don't bluff. So let them keep asking why you looked fine. Let them keep trying to diagnose it, moralize it, explain it away so they don't have to confront what it means. You already know the answer. You looked fine because you didn't betray yourself. You looked fine because you didn't hesitate. You looked fine because the moment you walked away, you were lighter than you'd been in a long time. And that kind of calm, it doesn't come from chaos. It comes from finally choosing yourself and not flinching afterward. And that lightness you felt afterward, that wasn't relief from winning. That was the weight of tolerance finally leaving your body. People underestimate how heavy tolerance is. They call it patience. They call it grace. They call it being the bigger person. But what they don't tell you is that tolerance becomes poison when it's forced. It corrodes you quietly. It teaches your nervous system to normalize disrespect. It trains your instincts to hesitate when they should act. You carried that poison longer than most people could survive. So when you finally released it, when you chose action over endurance, your system didn't collapse. It recalibrated, like something snapping back into alignment after being bent for too long. That's why you didn't shake. That's why you didn't over-explain. That's why you didn't need to stay and watch the aftermath. Your body recognized completion. And that terrifies people who live off unfinished business. Because unfinished business is leverage. It's how people keep you emotionally tethered. It's how they provoke reactions later. It's how they reopen wounds and say, "See, you're still affected, but you closed the loop. Cleanly, publicly, irreversibly. You didn't leave a crack for reinterpretation. You didn't leave an opening for reconciliation theater. You didn't leave space for them to feel important in your healing arc. You ended the story and walked into the next one without dragging their name behind you. That's why the silence around you now feels heavier than the noise ever did. Because when someone loses control, people rush in. They gossip, they analyze, they moralize. But when someone shows finality, people hesitate. They don't know where to place it. They don't know how to interact with it without exposing themselves. So they watch. They watch how you move afterward. They watch what you don't say. They watch how little energy you give to the fallout. And with every calm step you take, a quiet realization spreads. whatever power they thought they had over you, socially, emotionally, psychologically, it evaporated the moment you chose yourself without apology. That's the real nuke, not the act, the detachment. Because detachment isn't indifference, it's discernment. It's knowing exactly what deserves your emotional investment and what never did. It's being able to apply force without letting the force rewrite who you are. That's why the saint versus psychopath dichotomy collapses in your presence. Saints are expected to suffer. Psychopaths are expected to enjoy. You did neither. You acted and moved on. No martyrdom, no gloating, no performance, just alignment. And alignment is rare because it requires something most people avoid their entire lives. Accountability to yourself, not to the crowd, not to optics, not to future forgiveness narratives, to your internal truth. You didn't ask, how will this look? You asked, can I live with not doing this? And once you answered that honestly, the rest was inevitable. That's why the moment felt surgical instead of explosive. That's why it felt like a line being drawn instead of a tantrum being thrown. You weren't acting from chaos. You were acting from clarity that had been earned the hard way. Years of swallowing things. Years of choosing peace when it cost you dignity. Years of watching patterns repeat because you kept hoping they'd stop on their own. Until one day, your system decided it was done paying that price. And here's the truth they'll never say to your face. Your calm scared them because it exposed their own lack of it. It forced them to confront how much of their behavior relies on other people staying small, staying confused, staying emotionally available for manipulation. You stepped out of that economy entirely. You didn't need to dominate. You removed access. And once access is gone, the power dynamic flips permanently. That's why even now, after the shock fades, after the gossip dies down, after people pretend they've moved on, something has changed at a deeper level. A precedent has been set. A line has been crossed that cannot be uncrossed. They know now that you're not endlessly absorbent. They know now that you're not infinitely forgiving.